Okay, well, I just wanted to welcome all of you here tonight. Thank you so much for being here with us. We drew good weather again this year, which I feel really fortunate for. I probably made a deal with the devil and it's going to rain for the next 8 months, so I apologize. But today is good. So, hopefully not. Thank you so much for being here. It's really great to see so many HRB and housing supporters in our midst. Thank you for coming and for caring about this community. It really means a lot to us to have so many wonderful folks with us today. I do want to take a minute just to thank all of our sponsors for this evening's event. I hope you noticed the sign in the front acknowledging all of them when you came in. We are really so appreciative of our business community. We'd especially like to thank our premier sponsor, Via Rosa 11. Delicious. If you've never gone, please do. And our 2 presenting sponsors, Clark Construction and Eagle Harbor Books. I'd also like to take a minute just to say thank you to our board and staff. We have an amazing group of people, board and staff, and I am the fortunate one that gets all the compliments from all of you about how great things are and how well we're doing. And I just want to say it is not all me by any means. It's a great team of people that we're all working together. So thank you to them. So many of you have family members, friends, or colleagues who may feel a deep connection to Bainbridge Island through their work or through their family and friends, but who can't afford to live here. And perhaps, like me, you maybe can't afford your own house if you had to buy it at today's prices. Perhaps you're troubled by the lack of diversity on the island, the socioeconomic, cultural, and racial lack of diversity that can be attributed in part to the high cost of housing. Whatever your personal tie is to this issue, you're here because you recognize that there's a problem and you want to do something about it. The housing problem is really far too complex for any one solution. However, tonight we are choosing to feature community land trusts because they are, without a doubt, one part of the solution. And our hope is that you will leave here tonight as madly in love with this elegant and effective model for creating and sustaining affordable housing as we are. We hope that you will sing its praises to your neighbors and that you will write to your elected officials in support of policies that help CLTs grow. And most of all, we hope that you will understand the defining feature of CLTs, perhaps the thing that makes it most worthy of all of our love, permanent affordability. But community land trusts are not all one and the same. They tend to resemble the communities that create them. And you're going to hear about that more from our 2 lovely panelists this evening, and you might have also seen that in the blogs and social media posts that we've been sharing for the last few weeks. There are certain features, though, that we all share as community land trusts. At their most fundamental, community land trusts conserve land for permanently affordable housing, removing it from the profit-driven real estate market and using it for the long-term benefit of the community. How does this happen, you may ask? It happens because community land trusts build or acquire homes and then sell them to income-eligible households. But they never give up ownership of the land. Instead, they lease the land to the homeowner, and regulations in the ground lease, not market forces, dictate the sale in the future. And that keeps that home affordable in perpetuity while also allowing the homeowner to receive some equity in their transaction. Turn my page.
Page 2.
Page 2. Notes are the best. Community land trusts also are not just homeownership. They can include rentals, gardens, businesses, business space, or other community assets. And they work. We know this here in our own community. A home just sold in our Ferncliff Village neighborhood. It was built in 2013 and sold originally for $150,000. This year it resold and it was appraised at $612,000, but sold to a buyer for $189,000. So the seller was able to accrue almost $40,000 in equity, and we now have 2 new homeowners living in our community who have lived and worked here for a long time, but now get to be homeowners here. So we've seen that happen several times within Ferncliff Village, and then our fine panelists have been in this business a long time. They've seen it happen over and over in their communities. So, speaking of them, tonight I'm really excited to welcome our two guests from two regional community land trusts. We have Lisa Byers on the end she is the Executive Director of Opal Community Land Trust located on Orcas Island. And we also have Katie Ulrich. She is the Homeownership Program Director from Proud Ground in Portland, Oregon. And I would say that over the last 12 years that I've been at HRB, I have called upon these two experts for assistance multiple times, and so it is really great to have them with us tonight. So we're going to start out a little bit with some history. Lisa has been at this work for a number of years, and she's done so at the local as well as the national level. She was the first president of the National Community Land Trust Network, which is now known as Grounded Solutions, and she also sits on the board of the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance. And we're going to turn to Lisa, and she's going to give us a little history on community land trusts, which, as you will see, are not just a newfangled idea, but a model with deep roots and decades of refinement. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Phaedra. So I was joking before coming here that I know how to do this in an hour and a half with a PowerPoint slide. And I know how to do it if I'm caught in an elevator for a minute. But I'm not quite sure how to do the middle ground, so bear with me. So the concepts that underpin what the Community Land Trust is today have been around in American history ever since we were founded. And some famous names that you might recognize are Thomas Paine and Abraham Lincoln, who each in their writings at some point identify the fact that land, like air and water, should not be individual property, that it should be commonly held. Because, for those people who have a faith, they are God-given, and therefore not something that should be profited from. So now we're going to fast forward to the late 19th century, and there is a gentleman named Henry George, who was kind of one of these Renaissance guys, and he was a self-taught economist. He wrote a book called Progress and Poverty. And in that book, he pondered the question that just vexed him, which was, how is it that when you are poor in a rural setting, you can still have a house, you can still grow food. So you might be poor, but you're not destitute. But when you come into a city, people who are poor often became destitute. And what he theorized was that it was all about the ownership of land and access to land. And so he started what became known as the single tax movement. His theory was, if we eliminate all other taxes and we only tax the improvement on land, not the land itself, then we would find a way to moderate the sort of income inequality that he was so troubled by in the late 19th century. One of his followers was a woman named Lizzie Phillips, and she created the game Monopoly in order to teach people about the downsides of amassing all that real estate and the income inequality that then would thereby follow. So, popular game. So isn't that interesting that it became a popular game that, like, the moral lesson sort of vanished? That's the power of capitalism. So you heard Phaedra say that, you know, a tenet of a community land trust is leasing of the land and permanent affordability. So the first community land trust that we credit with actually having a number of the components of the modern day community land trust grew out of the civil rights movement. And C.B. King and Slater King were both cousins of Martin Luther King. They lived in and worked in a town about 3 hours south of Atlanta called Albany. And one of them was an attorney, the other I can't remember, but they were organizers of the Albany movement, which is one of the hotbeds of the civil rights movement. And they met a gentleman from the north who was a carpenter and a peace activist. Each of them had spent time in jail, and while in jail had pondered big questions about how is it that we can take this effort, this civil rights movement, and turn it into a constructive movement. So turn it from one where we're fighting and fighting, where actually we're creating something. And they coalesced around this idea that access to land was a critical piece of that. An interesting kind of quote for me is that a question that C.P. King had was, how can people fight fairly for inclusion when at any moment in time they can be kicked off the land, out of their homes, and their livelihood taken away from them? So they founded New Communities, Inc. in 1969, and this is the first time that a land-leased community, they purchased a large farm, and it's the first time that a land-lease community had on its, it was governed by this nonprofit group, and it had on its board people who didn't reside on the land. And that became one of the core tenets of the community land trust model. Now, unfortunately, they were striving to implement this in a still very troubled South, where people had a lot of prejudice. And so not only in their first decade did they struggle, they still succeeded, but they had people graffiti and damage their barns and just kind of create trouble wherever they could, but they were still succeeding. But then in the late 70s, there were 3 years of successive drought. And the white farmers were able to go to USDA and get loans to get them through. But the way that USDA operated was that the decisions were made at the local state level, and the state government loan officer for USDA in Georgia essentially said, over my dead body. And so the black farmers who owned this farm appealed and tried, but eventually USDA foreclosed on the farm and they lost it. And so out of that came another one of the tenets of the Community Land Trust, which is that when you own the land, you do so with equity. You do not have a note, you don't have debt against that land because you don't want to lose it. There's a great film and a good happy ending to this, which is that there were a bunch of class action lawsuits brought by black farmers in the South, and the New Communities, Inc. farmers were one of them. And in 2009, they were given a $12 million settlement from the federal government, and it gets better. They purchased a plantation, a 1,600-acre plantation that at one time was owned by the plantation owner who owned the most slaves in Georgia at any one time. And that plantation is now owned by black farmers.
Still good emotion. Yes. With good reason. Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. That was great. That was really good background on how we got to where we are with Community Land Trust. So now I just want for each of our panelists to share a little information about their own organizations and the portfolio of homes that they've had in their trust. So I'm going to start with Katie. Katie's been with Proud Ground in Portland since 2004. She's a HUD certified housing counselor, and she has served on the board of the Northwest CLT Coalition. And among her many duties at Proud Ground, she leads program innovations there. So Katie, can you just tell us a little about Proud Ground, how many homes you have, things like that?
Sure, yeah, thank you for having me. It's so exciting. I work at Proud Ground. We started in 1999, primarily to serve the city of Portland, and actually since then have grown to serve 5 counties, which is pretty unusual for a community land trust. We have a wide service area. In those 5 counties, we've actually brought in about 427 maybe this week home ownership homes into our permanently affordable community land trust, and we also have 100 permanently affordable rental properties in our program. We've done this in a lot of different ways, and we were just talking earlier about how this model is so flexible. We have small developments where there's up to 20 homes in a single development that are all community land trust homes. And we also have more scattered site homes that are integrated into market rate neighborhoods throughout the area. So we have also have condominiums, single family homes, townhomes, homes and co-housing communities. It's very flexible and diverse, the number of homes we have in our program.
Thank you, that's great. Lisa, can you tell us a little about Opal?
Sure. So Opal's been around since 1989, and we very much started with the Community Land Trust form of home ownership. Our first few neighborhoods were, there was an undeveloped piece of property, we bought the land, we designed a neighborhood, put in the infrastructure, built a cluster of homes, came up with a governance structure of the CCNRs for the neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. Since then, on the home ownership side of what we do, we have also purchased existing houses and converted them to community land trust model. We have moved houses from elsewhere in the islands, some actually from down sound, some from Canada, so we've moved about 12 or 15 houses at this point. And then the other thing I'll say is that in every neighborhood we've designed, we always include a community garden because we do feel like growing food is a core resiliency aspect of it. So, and then about 10 years into our journey, we recognized that we're an organization that was committing to being around in perpetuity, and if anybody knows how long that is, let me know. But we decided we should reside on land that we owned. And so we built a campus with our office, other offices, and we ventured then into rental housing. And we have since acquired and built rental housing as well. So we now have 204 homes between rental and ownership. And then we have a third initiative that we started a few years ago that we call the Island Loan Fund, where we were finding that there were people who were moderate middle income on the cusp of being able to buy a home, but they needed a few years in order to fix a credit issue, or so we deemed them as creditworthy, but under the bank standards they couldn't. So under the Island Loan Fund, individuals can loan or invest money with Opal. We pool those funds, and then we make a short-term mortgage loan to individuals and work with them to transition them so then at the end of 5 to 7 years, they can get a bank mortgage.
Wow. That's really impactful. Thank you both. So for those of you here that don't know about HRB, I'll just give a little brief introduction, although many of you have heard my spiel many times. HRB was founded first as a housing committee at Helpline House, and we became a nonprofit in 1989. We actually started out in the rental housing space, and today we have 90 units of rental housing with another 33 units in our pipeline, meaning we're building 33 in some form or fashion. We embraced the community land trust model around 2007 with the donation of the Ferncliff Village property, and we now have 44 homes, CLT homes in our portfolio with another 31 homes on the way. The majority of our properties are clustered together in neighborhoods or complexes, but we do have a few that are integrated into market rate neighborhoods. And then within HRB, we also have a program where we serve elderly and disabled community members through independent living, where we make health and safety modifications in private homes. So we're doing a little bit outside of just rental and home ownership. So thank you. Okay, so now I want to turn and talk to both of you a little bit about policy and advocacy. Lisa, can you tell us a little bit about how Opal has worked with local government to create policies that support affordable housing and maybe some key policies that have made your work possible?
So I'm going to tell you one local policy and one state policy that I'm excited about. So the local policy is that in Washington State, San Juan County in the late 1980s advocated and got the legislature to adopt a enabling legislation that allows counties to establish a real estate excise tax in support of land conservation. San Juan County to date has been the only county to adopt that. A few counties have tried but not succeeded. And then a number of years ago, we wanted to use that same mechanism to support affordable housing. We tried about 12 years ago and it failed, and then we tried again about 5 years ago and it passed. So starting 4 years ago, we have been collecting real estate excise tax from the purchase of property, from the purchasers of property, and to date, I think we're at about $12 million that's been collected and distributed, and it's been a game changer for us locally in the county. The funding plan is clear that the money is to go for permanently affordable housing, so it is for rental or ownership that is stewarded by a nonprofit organization that commits to being around. And so that's the local win, and that was just an extraordinary campaign of people really stepping up and being very clear about the importance, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but what it means to have people living in your community who still make the community work. So, and then the other thing I want to talk about is that on the statewide level, we have the Northwest Community Land Trust Coalition that brings all of us together, and we share ideas, and in Washington we formed a subcommittee that advocates with the legislature on things that support the work that we do. And we have one legislator from the 40th Legislative District, Alex Ramel, who was a homeowner of Culshan Community Land Trust. And he, when he got elected, said, you know, what can I do for you guys? And so we let him get his legs under him, and then he advocated for and got funded $1 million that we now are going to be able to use to teach other communities about how to do this community land trust thing. And it's very timely, because if you hang out around legislators at all, and anybody who cares about housing, they'll throw around the word community land trust, but I'm not quite sure that a lot of them know what it really means. So we're excited that we have the opportunity to help other communities get community land trust started, and help legislators understand how this is a tool that they can use to meet needs in their communities.
Thank you. Katie, what about you all in Portland?
So I think the community land trust, just in general, it is part of the role to do advocacy at the local government, because a lot of people they hear about it, but they don't quite know exactly what it is or how it can be implemented. And so it is really important to do those relationship building. In Portland, we've served on committees within the city, trying to do that education. One of the, wins that has happened that I wanted to speak to is it was called, the Residential Infill Project. So it was looking specifically at zoning laws in the city of Portland, and many of the zoning was for single-family residents, and that they're looking at changing that to be more density, more number of units, So that was successful, and what was great with the advocacy of affordable housing providers is that they are now allowed to get even a higher density if you incorporate some affordable units into your development. So I think that, like what you were saying with that funding, when we're advocating for this funding to be there, it's not enough that the funds are there. It's really looking at the long-term use of those funds and prioritizing, organizations that will keep those units permanently affordable. And so those are the pieces where the Community Land Trust can really have a say in that work. The other fund that in Clark County, so we actually do, I'm not just from Oregon, we do serve Clark County, Washington. So I sometimes get left out of the emails, all the Washington State CLTs, but I think we're getting better at that, right? So we do serve 2 states, which, as you can imagine, can be challenging too, right? The politics in 2 different states. In Vancouver, I don't know if anybody heard about that they passed an affordable housing fund probably 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, but a portion of that fund it's raised millions of dollars to support affordable housing. It's been great. It did primarily focus on households that are at 30% or below the area median income, so very, very low income, really looking at addressing the houselessness crisis. Which is very important, but we also have been advocating now with the city to look at housing as a spectrum, right? And I think that's what's great about HRB is they are, and many other CLTs, not necessarily Proud Ground, are serving that spectrum of housing. We don't want to just get people off the streets into an affordable rental. We can't stop there, right? Because if you're only option after being in your affordable rental when you're ready to move on is to leave your community. That's not a good solution. So making sure that people understand homeownership can be accessible for families as long as we're putting the effort into that and seeing it as, you know, people should have housing choice regardless of income, and if people want to put down roots and gain assets through homeownership, it has to be a piece of the advocacy in the affordable housing world. So.
Great. Yes, very great point. Thank you. So, with regard to advocacy and policy at HRB, we've been doing, as many of you here know lately, a lot of advocacy around the state statute requiring local jurisdictions to provide density bonuses to religious organizations who want to put affordable housing on properties. More commonly known as Bethany Lutheran, which all of you know. Most of you know anyway. HRB, we're not directly involved in that project with Bethany, but we are very supportive of their efforts and supportive of this ordinance that's now being proposed. And the Planning Commission and Council have been meeting and just creating and discussing this for the last 16 months. So we are very excited that on October 11th, there will be a public hearing on the final draft of that ordinance, and that will allow a density of 23 units on that property, which is about 2 times what it could have been built. So we're getting closer to the end of that, and you will all get our advocacy alert email shortly, asking you to make comment at council, to write a letter to council, so please do. We'll talk more about that a little bit. But so we've spent quite a lot of effort on that in the past year or so. Okay, so we do want to talk a little more about just engaging the community in policy work. Katie, can you talk a little bit about how Proud Ground has engaged the broader community, and are there specific achievements that you can attribute to activism around that?
Yeah, so when I heard this question, well, earlier, obviously this isn't the first time I heard this question. We do have some preparation. But you know, I think this is what's so great about the difference and uniqueness of who we have here today is by serving 5 counties, just thinking of the elected officials that are in 5 counties is mind-blowing as far as the engagement and relationship building that's really needed. And so that is a challenge we have at Proud Ground for sure. And I think what we've done to help in that arena is really connect closely with, you know, to find who are our champions in those communities. Sometimes they actually are in the local government, and so we can stay connected and know that they're there as the voice. And sometimes they're actually our homeowners. So we have had homeowners that have been actively testifying at city council meetings that live in those communities, and really getting that done. We also don't do the work we do alone. We couldn't do that, and we developed, one of the things that's been developed in the city, primarily for the city of Portland, is we created a Partners for Homeownership group, and it encompasses all of the homeownership organizations that are building affordable homes, whether they be CLT, permanently affordable or not. It includes our local habitat, and it includes all of the housing counseling agencies, many of them that are culturally specific. And we are now doing joint collaboration around advocacy to the city so that it's a collective voice about what the community needs and what everyone is seeing. So that has really helped, I think, advance some of those issues moving forward.
Lisa, what about Nicole?
And I think for us, it really is telling stories. I think the difference between the first campaign when we didn't succeed in passing that real estate excise tax and the second one was, one, that the need had increased, but 2, we had done a better job of having people who needed housing, who had gotten housing, tell their stories, and people connecting and saying, oh, I know that person. Oh my God, if they need it, then, you know, this is not so foreign, it's not so distant. And we've done, early on we did a book and we did an art show where we actually had the photographs and stories of people displayed at our local community arts center. And I remember actually when that opened, it was packed, and you could look down this hallway and just people were just crying. I mean, I was just like, wow, I did not anticipate that, but it just that heartfelt connection, bringing the humanity out really makes a big difference. Thank you very much. At HRB, we have really, in the last year especially, been increasing our advocacy efforts quite a lot, which many of you know because you get our emails that we call advocacy alerts. We are really trying to communicate frequently about what issues are happening, what's in front of council and planning commission, and encouraging people to send emails and make public comment. And then we also are working to communicate back what's happened, so kind of a summary of what came of whatever discussion is being had. We have recently put on our website a primer on how to write an advocacy letter, so if you feel confused about how you should do it, what you should say, it's broken down in easy steps. We have a policy specialist on staff, and they've started holding sessions to talk about issues and talk about advocacy in smaller groups, so you can have a conversation about it. And then really it's also what allows us to do this and kind of create this kind of program is just the generosity of our donors. We have to pay and support that, so all of you in this room are helping make that happen, so it's really been wonderful. Okay. So Lisa, I wonder if you could speak to how you feel affordable housing has changed your community, how it's affirmed the values that you have as a community. Has there been a turning point when you felt like the tide was kind of changing and people were really understanding and supporting it? So I think one of the things that's interesting about working at the local level in an arena like housing, and there's other arenas as well, but it's where sort of large societal or macroeconomic issues that we're dealing with have a face. So we have huge income inequality in this country. We have lots of issues that are fanning the flames of why we have a lack of adequate and affordable housing throughout the country. So the way that has ended up changing our community is that the San Juan Islands were back to the land haven. And in the 50s and 60s, there were people who were disconnecting and choosing to live there and were what I would call sort of Renaissance characters. They would, camp out on a piece of land and then build a one-room cabin, and they were experts with duct tape, and they were funky and they were fun, and that was community, and they had funky fun community. And what's happened over time is as the community has become less and less affordable, and we've become more and more attached to tourism. We have become more of a service economy, and there's a kind of a loss of a sense of self-determination in the community as a whole. And so having housing is a way for people to get grounded and remember that they actually do have some self-determination and that they can express themselves in ways that is, what their gifts are. So at Opal we often talk about It's a Wonderful Life in the movie, and we've tried to figure out, for those of you who don't know, it's the Jimmy Stewart movie where, okay, there's a lot of heads nodding. We're an old white audience, we know It's a Wonderful Life. And so for us, it's like when you walk down, quote unquote, Main Street, or in our case, it's North Beach Road in East End, and you look to the left or you look to the right, in whatever store you look into or whatever school, or, there's somebody who lives in Opal housing who works there or resides there. And so we've never quite gone all the way to having everybody wear an armband so that everybody would understand what would happen if they weren't there. But we know that the community would be really, really different if we weren't there. So.
Katie, what about Fort?
Yeah, I think, similarly, I think in any community, people have a misconception, right, of what bringing affordable housing to the community is going to do and what change that will bring. And, I don't think there's really a lot of evidence that it causes any negative impact to your community, right? It's your housing the people that are already here and at risk of leaving. And I think what we're seeing more and more as the problem continues, all of a sudden people that either have owned their home and are realizing I can't afford to buy my house today if I had to, and or their children are coming back to the community wanting to set down roots, and their children can't afford to live there anymore. So it's really just becoming more. It's touching more and more people, people that maybe never thought that they would need that type of assistance. So I think that has helped kind of change the perception of who is served by affordable housing and how that might change the community. It's really looking at trying to think of the word, but sustaining, right? Sustaining the community you have, so that you're not here in 20 years thinking, wow, where did all that go to, you know? And so it's more about embracing the current community you have and making sure everybody has a place.
Yeah, I think that those sentiments are very true. On Vancouver, just everyone here well knows. Our affordable housing has allowed many people to stay in this community who might not have had that option otherwise, but there definitely isn't enough. And I think this current climate is really bringing that to the forefront for everyone. Everybody knows somebody or is somebody that needs to benefit from that. I think Bainbridge prides itself on being a welcoming community, but the price for admission is really high. So more housing, having more housing that's affordable and permanently affordable will allow this welcome to continue, and it will help us keep and expand the diversity that we all really want to see. So we're feeling that here as well. So we're just going to wrap up with the future. So Katie, what is exciting about Proud Ground? What's happening in the future there?
Yeah, wow, so many things. I think we adopted a new strategic plan about 2 years ago, which sounds really boring. And it has a lot of numbers and goals and all that stuff. But I think one of the big things that we're looking at, and it's interesting because our new strategic plan, we've been around 22 years, but when I started there in 2004 and I walked in the door, we were very much looking at the racial disparities in home ownership and access to home ownership based on historic, obvious, overt discrimination and lack of access. So although we have been doing that work for the last 22 years, our new strategic plan is taking it like a notch up, and we have committed to serving, 75% of our home buyers in the next 5 years will be households of color. And we are currently, which is great. And we're doing it. We're like at 83%. When we signed on to that, I have to admit, I was like, all right, let's see how this goes. But we've just done such great work in the community, and I think the community land trust model does resonate. There's so many misconceptions about what it is, specifically in communities of color, but it's also, once it's fully understood, it resonates so much with the idea of putting that ownership of land really back into the community's hands and giving that long-term security. The other thing, speaking of long-term security, that I'm very excited about is we just hired our first ever stewardship manager, and the stewardship manager position is focused solely on supporting our homeowners. We have 425 homeowners now. So before, we were like, let's just get people into houses, but now we have homeowners that have been there 20 years and they have needs. And we need to, part of our success is making sure that they get the resources they need. So I am very excited to finally have a position to dedicate to that. And I will say a word of advice, we waited too long to hire that position. So I would encourage you to, look at that in your growth as far as making sure that's not left behind.
And for Opal, a few themes in terms of the future. One is absolutely stewardship. We're dancing the dance of what does that mean, and I think it's a real art about this relationship with homeowners, because it's not like rental tenants where you own the building and you know how to maintain it. And another piece for us is we continue to strive to go further up the income ladder and further down the income ladder. So we're now working with our Community Resource Center on doing a better job of serving people who don't have a house or have severely substandard housing, i.e. no indoor plumbing or heating. And then we're also trying to serve more moderate middle income households because, and so individuals and donors are key to that, because government funding comes with strings, and those always have an income limit on them. So we've really been cultivating relationships with supporters in the community and employers in particular who see that as key to our future. And when we chatted before about this, this story came to mind, so I want to tell it to you, even though it feels like a lot of place right now. But one of the things that I remember people asking me 15 years ago or so was, you know, when are you guys going to be done? You know, this sort of innovative, funky model, when are you going to be done? They haven't been asking that for the last 10 years. What they've been saying now is, well, what have you done for us lately? And why aren't you doing more? Or why even bother? I mean, the need is overwhelming. So one of my favorite parables is the parable of the sea star. So there's a man comes walking along the beach, and there's a little girl who's on the beach, and the beach is littered with sea stars, and this little girl is tossing a sea star back into the ocean, one at a time. And the man looks at her and he says, "Why are you doing that? There's thousands of them here. You can't help all of them." And she said, "No, but it made a difference to that one." So that's why we do what we do, one at a time.
Agreed. I love that parable. Thank you. That's awesome. And just for HRB's future plans, many of you know, but I'll just run through them really quick. We have a lot of things going on. In addition to just maintaining our current programs and properties, we have several development projects in the works. We're really looking forward to the acquisition of 13 rental units at the Wyatt Madison development, which is slated to be ready in the summer or so of 2024. That will replace the 550 Madison building that you may all remember, the little yellow building. So we will be gaining those back. And then we are also currently taking applications and working with potential home buyers for the 31 townhomes at Wintergreen. The first homes there will be ready in probably Q2 of next year, early summer. So if you know people that are interested in that, please send them our way. And then we are in the very beginning stages of planning a multifamily rental project of around 18 to 20 units on a lot that we own on Erickson, which is right in the core of Winslow. So we're really excited to move that project forward. And then, of course, we're going to continue with our advocacy efforts, and we want to just continue to figure out how to involve all of you beautiful people in our work. So, well, thank you, everybody, and thank you so much to Lisa and Katie for coming.